AMALearning, you're about to. Specification point 2.13. Explain the structure and function of sensory receptors, sensory neurons, relay neurons in the CNS, motor neurons and synapses in the transmission of electrical impulses, including the axon, dendron, myelin sheath, and the role of neurotransmitters. To successfully answer any GCSE questions linked to this specification point, you will need to know how the nervous system processes information, what a synapse is, and how it ensures that the electrical impulse travels in one direction. And finally, you will need to know how to label a neuron and also describe the function of the different parts that make up a neuron. The nervous system enables humans to react to their surroundings and to coordinate their behavior. The structures of the nervous system leads to fast, short-lasting responses to a stimuli. It is important to know how information is processed by the nervous system. It is important you know the following keywords, understanding how information is passed. You must know what stimulus is, what receptor cells are, the role of the coordinator, or the CNS, what the effector's role is, and how the above brings about a response. Now let's understand each keyword in more detail. Let's start with stimulus and receptors. A stimulus is any change in our surroundings or environment. The stimulus is detected by receptors. Receptor cells detect a change in our surroundings. Receptor cells send information along nerve cells, in this case the sensory neurons, as electrical impulses to the central nervous system, CNS. So once the stimulus is detected by the receptor cells, an electrical impulse is sent through the sensory neuron to the CNS. The CNS then sends electrical impulses to the effectors through the motor neurons. This brings about a response. The CNS is the brain and spinal cord. In any normal circumstance when there is no danger, the electrical impulse is sent from the receptor cells to the brain. When there is danger, the receptor cells send the electrical impulse to the relay neuron in the spinal cord. This leads to a reflex reaction. Reflex reactions will be explained in specification point 2.14. The CNS coordinates the response of effectors, which may be muscles contracting or glands secreting hormones. This means that the CNS, which is the brain or spinal cord, send an electrical impulse to the effector muscles or effector glands. The CNS sends an electrical impulse to the effector muscle or glands through the motor neuron. If the electrical impulse is sent to the effector muscles through the motor neuron, they contract. If the electrical impulse is sent to the effector glands through the motor neuron, they secrete hormones. Let's complete some examples to understand the above better. In example 1, the nose has detected some delicious food or chemicals and sent a message to the brain. What happens next? The brain makes a decision. I want to taste. The brain, which is part of the CNS, sends electric impulses to the muscles, which are the effectors, in the legs through the motor neurons. This brings about a response. The muscles in the legs contract and the person walks towards the food. In example 2, the skin has detected heat from a cup and sent a message to the brain. What happens next? The brain makes a decision. The tea is at the right temperature to drink. It won't burn me. The brain, which is part of the CNS, sends electric impulses to the muscles, which are the effectors, in the shoulders and arms through the motor neurons. This brings about a response. The muscles in the shoulders and arms contract, and the cup moves towards the person's mouth so that they can drink from it. In example 3, the ear has detected sound and sent a message to the brain. What happens next? The brain makes a decision. It is not loud enough. The brain, which is part of the central nervous system, sends electric impulses to the muscles, which are the effectors, in the fingers through the motor neurons. This brings about a response. The muscles in the fingers contract and press the increased volume icon. In example 4, the tongue has detected some delicious food or chemicals and sent a message to the brain. What happens next? The brain makes a decision. I need some water. The brain, which is part of the CNS, sends electric impulses to the muscles, which are the effectors, in the legs through the motor neurons. This brings about a response. The muscles in the legs contract and the person walks towards the tap. Watching the sunset. The stimulus in this example is light. The eyes are the receptor, as they contain special receptor cells that detect the light being emitted by the sun. Receptor cells in the eyes send information along the sensory neuron as electrical impulses to the central nervous system, or CNS. In example 5, the eyes have detected a sunset and sent a message to the brain. What happens next? The brain makes a decision. I want to take a picture. The brain, which is part of the CNS, sends electric impulses to the muscles, which are the effectors, in the arms and hands through the motor neurons. This brings about a response. The muscles in the arms and hands contract, and the person takes a picture. Let's apply what we have learnt to this exam-style question. When someone reacts to a stimulus, a change in the surroundings, messages from the brain are sent to their muscles. Describe how messages are sent from the brain to muscles. The question is asking, how does the brain send messages to the muscles? We have learnt that the brain, which is part of the central nervous system, sends electrical impulses to the effector muscles by the motor neurons. Let's compare our learning to the mark scheme. Our learning took us beyond the mark scheme. Well done. Full marks. It is important that you can both label the key parts of the neuron and also describe the function of the axon, the dendron, the dendrites, and the myelin sheath. The axon carries electrical impulses away from the cell body. Dendrons carry electrical impulses from receptor towards cell body. Dendrites are the branched ends which receive electrical impulses. The myelin sheath is the layer of fatty insulating material around motor and sensory neurons which speeds up transmission of the impulse. Let's apply what we have learnt to this exam-style question. Let's go straight to the answers for this one. The electrical impulse always travels towards the dendrites. This means the electrical impulse is moving from left to right. For the second part of the question, structure K is the myelin sheath, and structure L is the axon. Neurons are not joined together. They have a small gap between them. The gap between the neurons is called a synapse. When an impulse reaches the end of a neuron, a chemical neurotransmitter is released across the gap. The chemical then diffuses across the synapse. Remember, the synapse is the gap between the neurons or nerve cells. When the chemical reaches the next neuron in sufficient quantities, this starts another impulse. Let's apply what we have just learnt to an exam-style question. The question asks us to explain how impulses are transmitted at synapses. We have learnt that the synapse is a gap between neurons. When an impulse reaches the end of a neuron, a chemical neurotransmitter is released across the gap. The chemical then diffuses across the synapse. Remember, the synapse is the gap between the neurons or nerve cells. When the chemical reaches the next neuron in sufficient quantities, this starts another impulse. Now, let's compare our learning to the mark scheme. We have learnt enough to have got the mark for every single bullet point. This means we got full marks. Our animations were designed by experienced UK-trained teachers. We have been achieving amongst the best results in the country for many years, and we decided it was time to share our success. Have you just AMALed and want to AMAL some more? Don't forget to like, subscribe and share to keep yourself up to date with the latest uploads. AMALearning, you just did.